Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Real pleasure to welcome back to the program Mehdi Hasan, founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of the new media company Zeteo. Mehdi, welcome back and congratulations.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Emma, for having me.
You've got some cool contributors. You've got Cynthia Nixon, Greta Thunberg, who, I mean, I love her. She's younger than me, but I look up to her. So you got some really cool people that are joining in.
Yeah, I was very privileged when I reached out to people saying, look, I'm doing this. Can I get you on board in some shape or form? These are contributors, not full-time staff, I wish, but they're people who are going to be giving their support in some shape or form. Some already have. Some have already started writing columns. We've got kind of Spencer Ackerman, Pulitzer Prize winner Viet Thanh Nguyen, Pulitzer Prize winner Naomi Klein, Owen Jones, my good friend from the UK, Fatima Bhutto out of Pakistan. So we've got a good global lineup. And we're having a lot of fun just doing our own thing. Freedom has never tasted so good.
Yeah, it's nice, right? I mean, but there's also, it's a lot of work too.
I haven't slept in many weeks, as you can tell.
I would imagine, but congratulations again. And there's, we should say, like, you guys, what are your there's at least one podcast right now, right? To just tell us what's available for folks.
So right now, we are doing a weekly kind of TV style show, my old MSNBC model. It's called Mehdi Unfiltered, kind of big interview, panel discussion, monologues. We're producing that out of DC. That's once a week. And then twice a month, we have a podcast called We're Not Kidding, where I'm sitting down with comedians, people from the worlds of entertainment, comedy, people like Bassem Youssef, and talking about serious stuff. Like Gaza, like the election and other such issues. But we've got a lot of kind of other video content. I'm recording a segment with Owen Jones called Too Outspoken. We just taped one today about what's going on in the UK with elections and, of course, the college protests. I'm doing a monthly segment with Naomi Klein called Unshocked, a play, of course, on her famous book, The Shock Doctrine. So, yeah, there's multiple different video platforms and shows and segments. Plus, we're doing the email newsletter. We're on Substack, so we're doing the email newsletters. We're doing op-eds that go out to people on the list. John Harwood, he's one of our non-lefties, I think it's fair to say, more of a kind of centrist liberal. He's writing a weekly piece about DC politics called The Stakes, What's at Stake. So multiple different things depending on your interest when you sign up with Zeteo.
And how are you doing with cloning yourself? Is that
that is a great question. Well, it's we're slowly getting into that mode where we do want to kind of not just look. I could have set this up, Sam, as kind of the Tucker Carlson network. It could have been MHN, the Mehdi Hasan network, just me. But I very deliberately went out and said, no, I want to build something that endures. Majority Report has been around for 20 years. We hope we get to even 10 years. We're trying to build something that endures, that's not just a kind of vanity project for me. And so that's why we have such great global names coming on board as contributors. I have a great team producing stuff. Rula Jibril, the foreign policy analyst, Palestinian-Italian, just did a great interview for us with Jason Stanley, a professor at Yale, Jewish, about the campus protests in Yale, where he was saying, don't believe what you see on TV. I wasn't involved in that, thankfully. So yes, we need to find a way so I don't have to clone myself.
Well, that's great. That's really great. And we should also note that Tucker Carlson's network of himself is not doing well.
Yeah, it's a good start that you're not doing it on on Twitter, a non-video platform. You're going to actual video platforms to start your thing as opposed to Tucker. So that's already, you're already ahead.
Also, we're inviting actual newsmaking guests, not freaks and loons.
Right.
That's true. That also helps. All right. Well, let's get into what's been going on this past week. I mean, you mentioned that the folks can check out that interview with of stuff that's happening at Yale and around the country. But it really is. It's been stunning because I participated in a bunch of South Africa divestment stuff when I was in college.
You're dating yourself, Sam. Be careful.
Oh, I'm old. I'm very old, and everybody knows it. So there's no hiding from that. But I mean, there were the campus the school I went to was not a particularly radical campus at all. But there were administration building takeovers and there were occupations, and it was more or less like, okay, this is part of what college is about. And what we've seen in the past week or so has been extraordinary, it seems to me, and in some respects a little bit baffling.
I don't know how many times we can say that we're witnessing history these days. It just seems to be something historic happening all the time, whether it's pandemics or fascists on the rise or college campus protests that remind us of other, as you say, historic moments: anti-apartheid, anti-Iraq war, anti-Vietnam war, anti-segregation. And I've been very depressed at the media coverage of what's going on and the political reaction, but I've been inspired by what students are actually doing. But, Sam, we are witnessing propaganda in real time. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this since probably the Iraq war. I mean, I tweeted the other day that the coverage of the campus protests makes the coverage of Gaza look good. And I've been hugely critical of media coverage of Gaza, but at least with media coverage of Gaza, there's some truth getting out. There's some good reporting. NBC did a great report the other day on how civilians are being killed in safe zones. CNN did a great report on kids being targeted. When it comes to college campuses, none of our media organizations are doing any good reporting. It's all just propaganda, misinformation, distortions, hysteria, moral panics. The coverage of UCLA and the violence there by counter-protesters on Wednesday night was shocking, unforgivable, from the New York Times, from CNN and others. So the coverage has been deeply depressing. But look, I just have to keep reminding myself and reminding your listeners and viewers, this is how it's always been. I mean, I know people want to kind of look through history with rose-tinted lenses and rewrite history and pretend that we were always on the right side. But every time students have gone out to protest an injustice, whether national or international, they have not had political and media elites on their side. They haven't even had public opinion on their side. And somebody put out a poll on Twitter, the Gallup poll from 1963, which showed the American public clear majority was opposed to sit-ins, which today is in every museum, every school wall, every university. Funny that.
Yeah, the comparison to the Iraq war protests. I mean, this show was born out of that actually. The first one as a one-off was in February of 2003 because there was no dissent about the march to war that was allowed to be on television. The only person, I mean, honestly, like it was as a handful. Janine Garofalo was one of the few who were allowed to go on television to argue against it. And it was only because they had a ready-made argument. What are you doing here? You're just an actor. But
Phil Donahue got his show canceled on MSNBC.
Exactly. And I know that Robert Wright was calling down, anytime there was anything that was happening that was even vaguely against the build up to the run up to the war in Iraq. But that aside, there was not the level of propaganda, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in terms of what I want to talk about, but it's worthwhile, is astonishing. That
I've not seen anything like it for years.
I have not either.
The idea that you see non-violent, peaceful people in UCLA minding their own business in an encampment, they get attacked by pro-Israel counter-protesters, both on Sunday and on Wednesday night. Jewish professors like David Myers, distinguished history professor at UCLA, Dov Waxman, chair of Israel studies at UCLA, are coming out and saying, it's the counter-protesters. It's people shouting stuff in Hebrew, right, attacking us viciously. That happens, and the New York Times says, well, we're not sure who did it. CNN are like, both sides attacked each other. Are you joking? It's on camera. We can see them throwing fireworks into the encampment. And this is a moment where social media is so invaluable for all its many flaws.
Yeah, sorry, Mehdi. I just wanted to, in The Guardian yesterday, it was buried a little bit down, but it was talking about footage showed mostly male counter-demonstrators, many of them masked and some apparently older than the students. Quote, I saw women as young as 18 and 19 punched in the face by 25 or 30-year-old men, Aidan Doyle, a member of the student encampment at UCLA, said in the student protest on Wednesday. Bear mace potentially
sprayed. A lot of those
student
journalists were attacked.
Exactly. Bear mace was allegedly sprayed in the face of a student wearing a hijab. I mean, this is just like a massive blackout. And then it's like Biden coming out and saying, well, you have to be peaceful. You have the right to speak.
Let's play this clip.
Yeah,
let's play this clip by Joe Biden. This is from yesterday. Here we go.
Good morning. Before I head to North Carolina, I wanted to speak for a few moments about what's going on our college campuses here. We've all seen the images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles, the The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent.
Okay.
The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking...
Okay, we don't need any more. We get the gist of what's going on. I mean, just the idea that he came out to give this speech at all in recognition. What is the calculation here? Like, I just want to walk through this because we have this situation where the Republicans in Congress bring Ivy League presidents into Congress for hearings, beat them up over a supposed intimidation of Jewish students. I have a Jewish college student that I am very close to. In fact, she's my daughter. And she was asked the other day by by a relative who doesn't, who's just watching the news, do you feel safe? And she's like, what are you talking about? Like if you're on these campuses, the idea that there is some, and yes, have there been incidents? Of course.
Yes.
But when I was a kid playing basketball in high school, you drive by somebody, someone says Jew. This has been, there's anti-Semitism in the country and it's maybe on the rise. But the idea that this is the story is just fascinating to me because they leave those hearings, and that's why they cracked down at Columbia, because that was one of the most ill thought out strategies I've ever seen. And then it's like everybody has a license to do it.
This is what nature abhors a vacuum, Sam. And for years, Democrats have allowed Republicans to define the terms of debate when it comes to free speech, college campuses, anti-Semitism, Israel, whatever it is. And so, the culmination of all of that is calling in these college presidents and berating them. Stefanik does that. Democrats, again, AWOL. And then you get to this point now where, don't forget, this all kicked off because Minouche Shafik, the president of Columbia, calls in the cops Thursday before last, or Thursday before this one. Why? Because she's trying to appease Elise Stefanik. You can't appease Elise Stefanik. Stefanik calls for her to resign anyways. The whole thing is a disaster from start to finish. And yeah, the idea that it is really a moral panic. I can't blame your relative for asking your daughter if she's safe. What would you do if you just watch endless cable or read the New York Times and just see this manufactured hysteria about Jewish students being in danger? The Jewish students who were most in danger this week were the ones who were in Hamilton Hall where a policeman's gun went off. Yeah. That was the most dangerous moment for Jewish students. You know what the second most dangerous student was? UCLA, where we just discussed, where people were attacking them, a mob late at night while the police stood aside. You know what the third most dangerous moment was? At UPenn, where a pro-Israel protester arrived with a big knife in his belt and turned up in an encampment. We haven't heard about any of that. How many Americans know that a guy with a knife turned up on the pro-Israel side at a pro-Palestinian encampment at UPenn? It's just propaganda. I've taught about media studies at university. I've written media criticisms, but I've not seen it. I've not been part of it in real time, watching propaganda in this way. It is so manufactured. It is so deliberate. It is so relentless. Look at Dana Bash on CNN with that monologue that went viral for all the wrong reasons.
Amazing.
News host, basically pushing completely one-sided picture of what's going on. False in many cases in relation to UCLA. It's easy to say Fox and the Republicans, but it's the entire media, left to right or liberal to conservative. It's the Democrats who have indulged. House Democrats turned up at Columbia, a group of them, Josh Gottheimer, Jared Moskowitz, a bunch of them turned up to do a walk around in solidarity with Jews. Have they turned up at UCLA to do that? Have they turned up at UMass Amherst, where Arab American students say they got kill the Arabs threats, right? Have they turned up on any of these other campuses where black, brown, and yes, anti-Israeli Jewish students have been attacked? No, it's just complete one-sided propaganda.
The Gottheimer and Goldman doing these things, I get it from their political calculation and maybe from their ideology. But that Dana Bash thing, and maybe the Dana Bash thing, I also sort of understand from an ideological standpoint, because I don't know if she was one of the AIPAC, she was former AIPAC. Yep. And so, you get a sense of where she's coming from. But even Sharpton on, our old network, MSNBC. He's out there saying that, criticizing these protesters. The CNN piece that we clipped the other day, where a woman, was she from Colombia or from who was it? From Colombia, was brought on talking about how her identity is she's of mixed race, and was like talking about her identity as a Jew. She thought had been inoculated her, and somehow she's being attacked. Now, of course, she spoke at that pro-Israel rally down with John Hagee, but all of this is like, in these media circles, from your experience, are they oblivious, or is there just a simply conscious decision here to sort of put their fingers on the scale, and what drives that? Like in Dana Bash, I get it. Like she's AIPAC.
I don't think Dana Bash is AIPAC. I don't know why you're saying that.
Wasn't she part? Maybe it was just Wolf Blitzer.
I think you're thinking of Wolf Blitzer.
I think I am thinking of Wolf Blitzer, but
Dana Bash. Look, I have no problem. The funny thing is, I'm an opinion host. I have no problem with Dana Bash saying her opinions, right? That's fine. Right. They can be wrong opinions. Problem is, she's not supposed to be an opinion. I thought she's a straight news host. And the other problem is, where's the counter opinions? Where are all the CNN hosts who are sympathizing with the protesters? Oh wait, there aren't any. Where are all the other network hosts sympathizing with the protesters? There aren't any. My position has never been I'm anti-opinion. I'm an opinionist. It would be a hypocrite of me to say you're not allowed to have an opinion. Right. I'm saying let's have a diversity of opinions. That's all I'm asking for. Let's have a multiplicity of views so people can choose between them, not just one-sided coverage. And I get why a lot of people in the media, both Christian and Jewish, atheist, whatever, elites in our media, I get why the college thing is so visceral for them. They've got kids at the Ivies. They went to the Ivies. This is actually very personal in a way that Gaza perhaps isn't. Gaza's a foreign conflict. Everyone doesn't like Netanyahu. It's much easier to kind of, do some box-ticking criticisms of the Israeli government. This is much closer to home for a lot of people. You see hosts talking about my friend's kids or my kids. It's all very, even you, Sam, you just mentioned my daughters. Like, we all have a personal connection in some way. So it gets people much more emotional. And as I said, I just want to be very clear. I have no problem with Dana Bash pushing her views, as distorted as they were in that monologue, on air. I just want to see some balance. I want to see a counterpoint. I want to see CNN say, well, that's opinion. It's not our factual news, right, because it was incorrect. She said in there was a ceasefire on October the 6th. Not true. I've debunked that many times. That is not true that there was a ceasefire on October 6th. In fact, Israel was killing people in Gaza just days before October the 7th, and West Bank, of course. So that's not my issue. Is the lack of balance, the lack of diversity, the lack of kind of counter views. And also, when it comes to this stuff, Sam, a lot of it on the foreign policy front is ignorance, right? A lot of people don't follow this stuff closely. I'll be honest with you. A lot of DC journalists get thrown into covering foreign conflicts, Ukraine, Israel. Remember the Iraq war you mentioned? Well, I'm firmly of the view that if foreign correspondents had been covering Bush and Blair rather than like the DC press corps and the London, the Downing Street press corps, they'd have been asked better questions and held to more account, right? Sadly, our political journalists are not experts on foreign affairs. One CNN host the other day referred to Hind, the little girl, 6-year-old, who was killed after calling for ambulances and was stuck in a car on her own. Horrible tragedy, which the Israelis pretended they weren't involved in. She referred to her as a woman who was killed because they renamed the hall in Colombia Hind Hall. And she said a woman who was killed, and she got attacked. And I actually felt sorry for the CNN host because I don't think she did it purposely. I think she just didn't know. And this is the problem of covering the Middle East. If you don't know much about it, it's hard to actually hold people to account or be able to kind of, share the truth with your viewers and listeners. So that's one problem. And look, ideologically, we have a bunch of people in our media who don't sympathize with people on the left, with social justice activists, with black and brown communities fighting for equality. That's just a reality. And it's always been the case, as I mentioned. There was no sympathy for the civil rights protesters until way later. Martin Luther King was hated around the time he died, right? New York Times ran an editorial in 1967 slamming Dr. King after his anti-war speech at the Riverside Church. So this is nothing new.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of the I guess the second order politics of this, because it is there. There was a sense at the beginning of this conflict that the Biden administration, I think Biden is, this is probably the most ideological of any of his positions I think I've ever seen him hold, frankly, outside of maybe protecting the banks back in the day. But the reporting at the time, there was a sense of like, this is going to be good for Biden. Because with the sense that like he's going to help wrap this up and deliver the Abraham Accords or some iteration of it, and he's going to be able to look like the statesman and the guy who's not going to allow chaos to happen, so they can roll out their election strategy of making Trump into the chaos agent. That strategy seems to have been a total disaster and complete. All it has is exposed the Biden administration, or at least Biden himself, has no clue as to what's going on the ground in Israel. What do you think? Like, is he just now in a box? I mean, in addition to the ideological fervor, I think he has, which I think is true. I mean,
himself in the box. This is the problem.
Exactly.
What bothers me is over the last 6-7 months, we've seen Democrats who we never thought would criticize Israel come out and criticize Israel. We saw early on in the conflict a bunch of national security Democrats, the Abigail Spanbergers of this world, write a letter saying, you got to stop Israel, the direction it's going in. Biden doesn't do it. You have Nancy Pelosi come out a few weeks ago. Never thought in my life I would see Nancy Pelosi sign onto a letter talking about conditioning military aid to Israel. You have Chuck Schumer coming out saying Benjamin Netanyahu is an obstacle to peace, although now he's inviting him to Congress, apparently. So
well, I wanted to get to that in a second, but go ahead.
But Schumer says that. My point is, pro-Israel Democrats have seen that this is a moment to say, you know what, Netanyahu, everyone hates him. And you know what, 14,000 kids dead, we can't defend that. But not Biden. Biden will not budge. And 7 months in, the Biden is not budging makes no sense to me morally, of course. Obviously, how can anyone be okay with this? But politically, like, let's say he has no morals whatsoever. We know he does. We know he's a man of empathy, just not for the Palestinians. Why politically is he not seeing the disastrous road he's on? Why are the smart people around him not saying, hey, should we really be taking risks like this in Michigan, in Georgia? And you talk to Democrats. I've talked to people at the DNC. I've talked to members of Congress and people in the White House. They think that they can win regardless of this. They think that the people complaining will come home when the Trump threat is clear and present. They think that enough white suburban women in places like Michigan voting on abortion will save them. And they may be right. I'm not saying Biden won't win. He could easily win. It's a 50-50 race. But why take that risk for Benjamin Netanyahu? And if you believe American democracy is on the line, as Biden does, as I do, then why take the risk? Why risk American democracy for Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, who, by the way, are counting down the days for a Trump presidency quite openly?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, they're happy that this is sowing discontent for Biden domestically. But let's talk about, I want to ask you about that term democracy, because I've just been really struck over the past few months, but especially recently, of the weaponization of the term democracy and this idea that Israel is one, and that it's something to be protected, when we know that they militarily occupy and rule over 3 million people in the West Bank. They also basically keep over 2 million people in an open-air prison in Gaza that they routinely bomb. Interfaith marriage is not allowed in Israel. Gay marriage is not allowed in Israel. If you're a gay person, you can come and move there, but they don't perform gay marriages in Israel because they want to keep up their white demographic numbers. But like the idea that this is democracy, we've completely lost the plot on portraying democracy with any kind of real earnestness or accuracy, because that's not what Israel is. Israel is not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination, and yet this is what we're pretending we're promoting here. And when in fact it's this conflation of democracy with Western whiteness in a particular region that I find really troublesome.
So, I mean, look, I probably wouldn't go as far as you to say it's not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination. Clearly, it has democratic elements. It has a prime minister and a government that's voted in elections. But those elections, of course, are not available to millions of people who they rule over for decades on end in a temporary occupation. And, of course, those elections are to a parliament and a government and a system which doesn't allow for equality, right? So people are not aware of the fact that every year the Arab parties and a few far-left politicians try and put a bill to the floor calling for Israel to become a state of all its citizens. Pretty uncontroversial statement. Israel should be a state for all its citizens. Not only do they not vote on that bill, it's not allowed to be brought to the floor, right? It's seen as anti the system, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel. So that is a huge kind of, obviously, dagger to the heart of any argument that says Israel's a democracy like any other. Clearly, there's a debate amongst Israeli political scientists. Can you call it an ethnocracy, right? Is it a state that, privileges one group over another? We talk about apartheid. Was apartheid South Africa a democracy? Many people would say no, because only certain people got to vote. Now, the Israelis often say, how can you compare us to South Africa? Every Palestinian citizen, 1/5 of the population, gets to vote. And that's true. They do. But again, they vote as second-class citizens, not as equal citizens of a state that they want to be in. And there are millions of people being held under indefinite occupation who don't get a say over their lives. So fundamentally, there is a problem with this argument that Israel is the only democracy in the region. It's certainly not a liberal democracy by any definition. Like, we talk about illiberal democracy. We talk about the Orbans of this world or the Erdogans of this world. But the irony of calling it the only democracy in the Middle East is interesting, because there are other governments in the Middle East, Iraq, Tunisia, Lebanon, that also have elections and vote in governments, but we don't consider them liberal democracies because they have a lot of flaws to the system. And I would say the same thing about Israel. But look, that argument about democracy doesn't even matter right now, because whether you're a democracy or a dictatorship, we all agree that no country should be allowed to engage in genocide. So really the bigger argument right now is what Israel's doing, not what Israel is.
Yeah.
I should say that you recently had a piece on genocide, a couple of interviews, and I purposely accidentally sent that to some people, and then a clip of it. And there's a lot of family arguments about this type of thing, and I found it helpful to send a clip of what you recently wrote up. Yeah, and others. You had cited a couple others.
Well, Amos Goldberg, who's the latest to come out,
yes.
he's the Holocaust historian at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He wrote a very powerful piece at the weekend saying, yes, this is a genocide. And the two key points he made that are worth remembering is, number one, every regime that's engaged in genocide says it's self-defense. Like, the idea that Israel says it's defending itself is irrelevant, because everyone, the Hutus and Tutsis, in every genocide, the genocidal party says, we're just defending ourselves from an existential threat. So that's one point he makes. And the other point he makes is, the only genocide is not the Holocaust, right? You cannot say if it's not the Holocaust, it's not a genocide. It doesn't have to be the Holocaust to be a genocide. The Holocaust is a very unique genocide, the worst genocide. But the idea that if it doesn't identically mirror the Holocaust, it's not a genocide, is just ahistorical and wrong.
Do you think, and I want to get back to sort of like the sort of the second order politics of this in a moment, but do you, from a historical standpoint and from a messaging standpoint, how much does it matter that we, from a rhetorical standpoint, I mean, obviously, the ICJ determining that it's genocide, but they won't be able to do that for several years.
They probably will.
But from a rhetorical standpoint, how much of that is relevant? Like, if, in the sense that, if it's just ethnic cleansing, let's say,
yes,
and just, killing thousands of children.
But just war crimes.
That's
a great question, Sam, because I was torn on this at the beginning. When the genocide debate first started in, October, November, and then December with the South African petition, I was one of those people who was on the fence. Like, should we be investing all our energy in fighting over the word, or is it, whether it's a genocide or not, it's horrible, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, killing of children. But I've switched. I do think it's important to use the G word, because A, we should mislead people as to what it is and what it clearly is. B, there is a legal implication. But C, as Amos Goldberg points out in that piece I mentioned, you can't just see everything through a legal lens. There is a moral moment of our time. And I find it ironic. Isn't it ironic how we've all been distracted by the ICJ, and did they say it was plausible or not plausible? What were the provisional measures? And actually, we've been distracted by the fact that, hold on, we all just say there's a genocide in Xinjiang, or most of us do. I know some on the far left don't. But there's a genocide against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. There's a genocide in Ukraine, says Joe Biden, right? I don't remember having long, interminable legal debates about whether we call what's happening to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang a genocide. I don't remember having to go to the ICJ to decide whether Putin's doing a genocide in Ukraine. And by the way, the Ukraine analogy is the best one of all, because there's an argument that says, how can it be a genocide? They haven't killed everyone. Well, they haven't killed everyone in Ukraine either. And Putin has a nuclear weapon. He could if he wanted to. Does that mean he's not genocidal? Now, I'm not saying we should have a debate right now about whether Ukraine's a genocide. I just find it fascinating that Joe Biden will casually say there's a genocide in Ukraine, there's a genocide in Xinjiang. But when it comes to Gaza, oh no, let's get 17,000 lawyers to give us various opinions.
Well, right. I think it's important. I mean, we've had this conversation to democratize the term genocide so people have a broad understanding of what is illegal and wrong warfare, and then we can have a more robust recognition of international law as a concept that states have to be held to. So I use the term whenever I can. We are seemingly far away, and I want to ask you what your opinion is from a mainstream news outlet beginning to call it, because it's an Israel-Hamas war, these two sovereign actors just battling it out. When will MSNBC do it? When will they say the G word?
My first clip, I was off air for a few days after the October 7th, and when I came back, I did a very long monologue that we did put on YouTube on whether it's genocide or not, and I walked through the arguments. I was very fair. I allowed all the different sides in, but I used the G word, and I was very insistent that we talk about the G word. What's interesting about the G word is you don't even need to be familiar with the Genocide Convention details. It's almost like the Supreme Court definition of porn. You know it when you see it. I was on with Piers Morgan this week, and I said, hold on, if Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, says, I want a total annihilation of Gaza, every sane person goes, that's pretty genocidal. Total annihilation of Gaza? Pretty genocidal by any common understanding of the word. And even Piers brought himself to it's borderline genocidal rhetoric. I dragged him to borderline. But, he wouldn't go full on. But what else do you call the total annihilation of Gaza? The rhetoric is genocidal. There's just no debate about that.
Well, I guess that's my, to the extent, I don't hesitate to use the word genocide, but the question for me is like when I deploy it in what conversations, because I don't want to spend 20 minutes arguing over what's genocide. We can just argue over what we know is to be facts.
Well, here's what I would say.
Yeah, the point.
I was just going to say specifics are so important as well. When I'm arguing with, for example, Israeli people, I had Ehud Olmert on my new show a couple of weeks ago. It's very easy to go war crimes, ICJ, Human Rights Watch, and everyone talks in the air. And actually, it's much easier to go, all right, Israel bombed this apartment on this day with these civilians in it and no militants nearby. How is that not a war crime? Right? You've got to be specific with some of these people, because everyone loves to have highbrow, abstract, legal and moral debates. But when you get down to the specifics, all right, Israel bombed the World Central Kitchen truck. The guys got into another car. They bombed the next car. They got into a third car. They bombed the third car. Is that an accident? Like, you get to specifics and they really have no defense.
Right. I find that just more broadly more effective, at least in the context of I think I probably have more conversations with Israel supporters off air than I do on air, frankly. But let's just getting back to your sense of the Biden campaign's perspective on this in terms of what it means for the elections. And also we watch, honestly, it does feel like that. And Schumer inviting Netanyahu, like what constituency is out there outside of maybe donors? Yeah. But how do they think this is not going to impact it? Because it's one thing to say, okay, we don't know how many people are actually going to vote on this. Yes. But it's another to say, we're starting to, we're undercutting our primary argument for reelection, that narrative being democracy's on the line. Yes. Well, if democracy is on the line, you're risking it. Maybe you think the calculation is we're going to eke it out, but you're risking it for what? That undercuts things. And also, there's I have talked to, and I'm sure you have too, folks who run progressive organizations that right now would be all in, get out the vote, mobilizing, organizing, who are completely demoralized because they're paying attention to this stuff.
Yes. Well, Sam, college Democrats. National College Democrats have come out against the White House pretty strongly. I saw their statement yesterday on Twitter. Whoa. College Democrats, pretty loyal group of the party on most issues. It's true. I was one of those people, Sam. Prior to October the 7th, I was the guy who told The Guardian that Joe Biden is the greatest president of my lifetime. I got battered by some people for saying that. And I said, hold on, I'm saying it in a relative sense. He's the greatest president compared to Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, George Bush Sr., Ronald Reagan, and Barack Obama. It's pretty easy to see that he's better than all of them. Maybe Obama's the one people might argue on. But that was based on his domestic record. That was based on ending the Afghan war. That was in the base of keeping American troops out of Ukraine. That was on the base of the Inflation Reduction Act. October 7th changes all of that. I can't come out and say with a straight face now, everyone should vote Biden, save democracy. Very hard when there are fascist police beating up a 65-year-old former chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth on camera. Right? I can't see images of RoboCops beating up old women and go, that's Trump's America. Oh, wait, no, that's Biden's America.
Right.
fascism is already here on some of our campuses. It's very hard. And I've been pushing the democracy argument, the anti-fascist argument, probably longer than anyone else. I was one of the first people to even say the word fascism on MSNBC in August of 2020 during the George Floyd protests. So I've been pushing this for a long time, but even I think now they had two big arguments in their favor going into the election. One was save democracy, stop Trump. The other one was abortion rights, stop the GOP, right? They only have one of those now in many ways. I mean, Trump is still a fascist existential danger. I'm under no illusions about Trump. I don't think he should be president. I think American democracy is pretty much over as we know it if he is president. But in terms of Biden rallying the troops, getting people out, using it as a successful argument, very hard. Also, we didn't talk about what role does Netanyahu play in that. If Benjamin Netanyahu, part of an alliance of global autocrats, Orban, Modi, Putin, Netanyahu, they're all part of the same cloth. If he's speaking in Congress at Chuck Schumer's invitation, sorry, what happened to democracy versus autocracy? I mean, and also the vibes, we talk about the economy and vibes. What about just the vibes of an election year where there's going to be massive protests, I assume, at Congress if Netanyahu turns up while leading a genocide? There's going to be massive protests in Chicago at the DNC and uncommitted delegates. We could have a 1968 scene on our hands. How does that general image of chaos and division, Democrats in disarray, which the media loves that headline, how does that help Biden going into a very close election? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's play this clip. And you
mentioned 1968. Here we go.
This is Bernie Sanders on what was he on this weekend? I don't know.
This is with Amanpour on CNN. So he was on yesterday, and
has been doing. We should say it's been doing. Christian Amanpour has been doing a really
very good. She's
job.
One of the best at CNN right now, without a shadow of a doubt.
And she's showing her bona fides as somebody who's an actual international correspondent as opposed to someone just sitting in a studio, because she just gets it. Yeah, like what Israel has been engaging for this long.
There was a long interview with Sanders, but this is apropos for what we've just been talking about.
Anti-Semitism is a vile and disgusting ideology, which, as everybody knows, in the last 100 years alone, has led to the deaths of many, many, many millions of people. We got to fight anti-Semitism in every way that we can. But for anybody to suggest that we cannot be critical of the government of Israel or the government of Italy or the government of Ireland, for whatever reason, is not what democracy is about. So I happen to believe, not everybody agrees with me, that the war policies of the Netanyahu government are a disaster. They are causing unprecedented harm. They are in violation of international law and absolutely in violation of American law, by the way. But I think people who are critical, the idea that people who are critical of what Netanyahu is doing are anti-Semitic, that is nonsense. And that is a very, very dangerous line to cross in terms of freedom of expression in this country.
And for our generation who grew up in the era of never again and are very, very committed to that, I think it's really tough when we see this word weaponized and maybe lose its sting and its importance, as Kenneth Stern warns. So I want to ask you, my question to you is, what do you think now is going to happen to Biden and his campaign? Where do you think all of this is going to lead? Because it's also about American foreign policy.
Well, in terms of his campaign, I am thinking back, and other people are making this reference, that this may be Biden's Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson, in many respects, was a very, very good president. Domestically, brought forth some major pieces of legislation. He chose not to run in '68 because of opposition to his views on Vietnam. And I worry very much that President Biden is putting himself in a position where he has alienated not just young people, but a lot of the Democratic base in terms of his views on Israel and this war.
I mean, tough to argue. Although I don't think we're going to see Biden step aside, although I think that would be effective, frankly. But I don't think he's going to step aside.
Yeah, I think that window closed, and the only reason he steps aside now is it's a health issue.
Right.
I mean, his poll ratings are not that bad. I mean, they're just not. It's a close race, right? It shouldn't be this close. Okay, there's two different things. One, to be clear, it shouldn't be close. Donald Trump shouldn't be close to anyone in a normal country. He would not be polling anywhere near the possibility of winning. The guy's on trial. The guy is a fascist. The guy tried to destroy American democracy. Put that to one side. I think you swap out Biden for any other generic Dem. It's not like they're going to suddenly have a 10-point lead on Trump. This country is so divided. The negative partisanship is so high that those are the numbers we have. And that's why it's such an important to get your base out, right? So important to get your people knocking on doors in an election where anywhere between 40 to 70,000 voters could decide the entire election for the entire country. You can't take risks. You need to be able to inspire and energize. I just don't see that. And it's not just Gaza, by the way. Are you seeing that on other fronts? I'm not seeing that on other fronts either from Biden.
Well, the
marijuana thing was good, but what do they do?
Well, the marijuana thing, I mean, but I'm looking back at, like, you know, the pause that they did on that liquid natural gas export facility permitting. Bill McKibben says that was the biggest thing that we have seen, bigger than the Willow Project screw up. I mean, bigger than anything. But there's not going to be any coverage of it because it's all stepped on because of what's going on with.
And you can't even just blame the media or Republican Party. You have Democrats encouraging this crap. You have, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that was sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican. Ridiculous bill that sucked up media and political oxygen this week.
There's a quality of this that's reminiscent about like the HR 1 when the Democrats took the Congress, the House against Trump. And they're unveiling their big signature piece of legislation, which is going to be a huge message bill. And instead, everybody's talking about Nancy Pelosi censuring Ilhan Omar at the time, because that's what they decided to do. There's a similar sort of like quality that's going on here. These, whatever it is, providing DACA coverage under Obamacare today. Nobody's going to be talking about that tomorrow because they're talking about Netanyahu or what's going on college campuses.
It's a simple political calculation. If Joe Biden were to come out tomorrow and say, we are cutting arms to Israel until we get a ceasefire right now, until Netanyahu says we're staying out of Rafah, and until more aid goes in, right? If he said that, what would that cost him? What would that cost him? Because I hear people say, well, he can't afford to lose Jewish votes just to win Muslim and Arab votes. Most Jewish voters in this country don't like Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't understand what the political calculation is that prevents you from picking a fight with Benjamin Netanyahu. There is none. He's super unpopular. The only people who like Benjamin Netanyahu in this country are the House GOP. Right? Nobody likes Benjamin Netanyahu. It's an easy fight to have. He doesn't have it because he doesn't want to. Because it's not about political calculation. He likes Benjamin Netanyahu. He feels it his obligation to do this behind-the-scenes bullshit strategy where behind the scenes he doesn't like Netanyahu. It just doesn't work. We're 7 months in, and it's a win-win all around. If you come out for a ceasefire, you get international respect. You look like a strong leader. You're doing morally the right thing. You're shoring up your flank with progressives and non-white voters in places like Michigan and Georgia. Who are you pissing off? You're pissing off the House GOP and a few Christian evangelicals.
I think your point about him you're saying that he would look strong. He looks weak. Like, so we talk about his age, and that's that we can't change that, right?
Definitely.
But Sam has made this point before, that the age is kind of correlated with a perception of him as a weak leader.
Yes.
And there was a poll in CNN that said 81% of people, and this was taken a few weeks ago, it's probably higher, of people 18 to 35 disapprove of how he's handling Israel and Gaza. But in general, the majority position in America right now is they don't approve of Israel's actions now, and that's been a shift. So if he wants to look strong, perhaps stand up to the leader of the client state that is entirely dependent on our military aid for their survival by using an ounce of leverage. That would help him with the age stuff because he looks he has some vitality.
When did Biden look strongest as president of the United States? In my view, he looked strongest as president of the United States when he did the State of the Union and he got heckled by Republicans and he heckled them back. Right? People like a fighter. I've said this before. It's not even about left and right. Like, we're on the left. It's not about what your politics, policies. Yeah, that's all important. But actually, people just want someone with fire in their belly who's willing to have a fight. And guess what? You've been given the gift. You could have a fight with Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich, like the worst people. It's like MBS during the Trump era. It was easy for Democrats to call out Trump because the bad guy was MBS, like a cartoon villain. Well, we've got another cartoon villain. His name's Netanyahu.
Yeah, I that's why I say I think it's Biden's most ideological position he's held probably in his career. I mean, you can go back and I'm sure you're aware that when Menachem Begin came in the wake of the Lebanon invasion of Lebanon, one senator stands up in a caucus meeting and says, "You should kill children, and you're right to do that to protect yourself." And even Menachem Begin, guy who was involved in blowing up the King David Hotel, was like, "Whoa, you got to slow down, buddy." I mean, this is
although to be fair to Biden, it's Begin who tells that story, and he comes out of it very well. So I'm not,
yes, I guess that's true.
Fair point. Yeah.
I don't remember Biden saying that wasn't me. It's not like Biden disavowed it either, though.
We know he was always a hawk. Look,
he loves Golda Meir, who said, like, basically, it's so sorry we have to kill your children to protect ours. So it's in keeping with what we know about his ideology.
The Biden thing, the thing about Biden, is a lot of people have pointed out on social media, is he was wrong on civil rights. He came around to the right side. He was wrong on Vietnam. He came around to the right side. He was wrong on Iraq. He came around to the right side. Give him 20 years, he'll come around on Gaza too.
Right. Exactly. Mehdi Hasan, thank you so much for coming on. Folks got to go check out Zeteo. Zeteo.com, is it?
It is indeed. Zeteo.com.
There you go. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm in the podcast and YouTube description. Thanks so much, Mehdi. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much.